The jungle was alive with unfamiliar sounds, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just out of sight. Thorny plants and twisted vines wrapped around ancient trees, their leaves glistening with morning dew under the strange light of an alien sky. To many, this was a hostile, inhospitable place, but to the expedition team, it was another world to be explored and understood. They moved carefully, each step measured to avoid startling the native wildlife, some of which had been noted to be highly aggressive if disturbed. It was during one of these cautious steps that Sarah, the lead xenobiologist of the group, froze in her tracks. Her trained eye caught something in the underbrush, a flicker of movement, so quick it could have been missed in a blink. But this wasn't just a rustle of leaves or the retreat of a harmless creature. It was the quiet, pained whimper of something trapped. She signaled for the rest of the team to hold back, crouching low to investigate. Brushing aside the foliage, she found herself staring into the wide, fearful eyes of a cub, its slender, muscular body tangled in a mess of spiked vines. Its sleek, silver-black fur was matted with dirt and patches of blood, and its small but sharp fangs were bared in a warning snarl. The creature was one of the apex predators of this region, a creature usually best observed from a safe distance and avoided at all costs. But here, it was helpless, caught in a struggle it could not win alone. "Sarah, careful," murmured Jackson, one of her teammates. "It could call for others. We don't know what kind of trouble that could bring." But Sarah couldn't tear her gaze from the cub. Its eyes held an intelligence she hadn't seen before in other alien species, something deeper than mere survival instinct. Fear, yes, but also pain and resignation. This creature knew it was vulnerable, and it knew it was at their mercy. "We can't leave it like this," Sarah whispered, her voice more certain than she felt. "Look at it, it's just a baby." Jackson hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the area was clear before nodding reluctantly. "Fine, but make it quick. If its parents show up, we're done for." With gentle hands, Sarah took out a small field knife and began cutting through the vines. The cub hissed, baring its fangs and flattening its ears, but she spoke to it in soothing tones, her voice a quiet hum of reassurance. The creature didn't understand her words, of course, but something in her tone seemed to calm it, if only a little. She worked carefully, mindful of the thorns, making sure each movement was as painless as possible for the injured cub. Bit by bit, the vines gave way, and finally, the cub was free. It tried to stand but stumbled, too weak to manage on its own. Sarah watched as it attempted to regain its footing, its legs shaky, its breathing labored. She reached out, unsure if it would accept her touch, but the cub didn't pull away. Instead, it looked up at her, eyes filled with something that could have been gratitude or simply exhaustion. Jackson stepped forward, still wary but unable to ignore the bond forming in front of him. "It's hurt worse than we thought," he said, glancing at the cub's wounds. "What are you planning to do, Sarah?" "We take it with us," she replied, already moving to lift the cub as carefully as she could. "At least until it can recover. We can't just leave it here to die." The team exchanged glances, weighing the risks. Taking an apex predator, albeit a young one, into their camp was risky. But the way the cub leaned into Sarah's hold, too tired to resist, seemed to speak volumes. It was a risk, yes, but it was one they all quietly agreed to take. The journey back to their camp was tense, each of them on high alert for signs of the cub's parents, or any other threats that might view the weakened creature as an easy meal. Sarah held the cub close, murmuring softly to keep it calm. She knew the creature didn't understand her, but there was comfort in her words, a steady stream of reassurance that helped soothe her own nerves as much as the cub's. When they reached the safety of the camp, they set up a makeshift shelter for the cub. Sarah disinfected its wounds and wrapped them as best as she could, using their limited medical supplies sparingly, but with care. As she worked, she noticed the cub watching her with those intelligent eyes, tracking her every move. It was strange to see such attentiveness in a creature known primarily for its ferocity and power. Over the next few days, the cub remained in the camp, too weak to leave and, perhaps, too wary to try. The team members took turns feeding it small portions of their own rations, adjusting their supplies to account for the extra mouth. The cub seemed to understand the situation, accepting the food but never snapping or showing signs of aggression, a surprising show of restraint that spoke to its intelligence. One night, as Sarah sat beside the cub, gently stroking its back to reassure it, Jackson sat down next to her, watching the creature with a mix of awe and wariness. "You think it understands?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sarah nodded slowly. "Maybe not everything, but there's something there. I don't think it sees us as a threat anymore." Jackson sighed, shaking his head. "You've got a soft heart, Sarah. But this thing, when it grows up, it's going to be dangerous. You know that, right?" She looked at the cub, watching as it closed its eyes, relaxing under her touch. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But if we show it kindness now, who knows? Maybe it won't see us as enemies when it's grown. Maybe it'll remember." It was a hopeful thought, perhaps a foolish one, but it was all they had to go on. For now, the cub was part of their little family, and they would do their best to protect it, to teach it that humans could be allies rather than adversaries. As the days passed, the cub's strength began to return. It moved around the camp more confidently, following Sarah wherever she went, watching the team with curious eyes. It still had moments of skittishness, times when it would recoil at a sudden movement or sound, but it always returned to Sarah's side, as if reassured by her presence. Other members of the team started warming up to it as well, giving it space but allowing themselves to feel a bit of the wonder Sarah had felt from the beginning. They had saved this creature's life, and in doing so, they had earned its trust, perhaps even its friendship. The bond was fragile, but it was real, a connection forged through compassion and understanding. The cub, once a fearful creature bound by thorny vines, had become something more than just an apex predator to them. It was a reminder of the strange and beautiful possibilities that lay beyond human understanding, a testament to the power of empathy even in the most unlikely circumstances. And as the cub continued to heal, the team couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would the creature stay with them, or would it eventually return to the wild? Only time would tell. But for now, they had each other, an alliance born of compassion and trust, and that was enough. In the days that followed, the cub's recovery became the focal point of camp life. It remained wary, still eyeing the humans with the kind of caution only instinct could teach, but it was also undeniably curious, watching them with a keen intelligence that only grew more evident. Sarah became its anchor, the one person it sought out, as if sensing that she was the reason it had been saved. Each interaction between Sarah and the cub was a careful dance. She approached it slowly, with gentle, deliberate movements, allowing it to sniff her hand before making any attempts to touch. Every time it allowed her closer, it was a victory, a small chip away at the barrier of fear that divided them. Little by little, she earned its trust, a process that required patience and consistency. The rest of the team, though initially cautious, began to accept the cub's presence as well. Jackson was still wary but couldn't deny the progress he saw. One evening, he offered the cub a piece of dried food, holding his hand out slowly, waiting as the cub sniffed the unfamiliar offering before hesitantly taking it. It was a slow, tentative gesture, but it marked another turning point. The cub was beginning to see the humans as something other than potential threats. Sarah often sat with the cub in the quiet hours of the evening, speaking softly, even though she knew it couldn't understand her words. It wasn't about language but rather the tone and consistency, the simple act of being present. As she sat beside it, she could see the creature slowly relax, its muscles unwinding, its posture softening. She knew it was still wild at heart, but for these moments, there was a truce, a mutual understanding that neither of them fully knew how to name. One night, as Sarah gently patted its back, the cub leaned into her touch, a cautious but undeniable gesture of trust. It was the first time it had shown such a sign of affection, and she felt a rush of emotions, relief, awe, and a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just an animal anymore. It was a creature with its own thoughts and feelings, a creature that had chosen to trust her. Other team members noticed, each interaction adding to the quiet transformation happening within their camp. The cub's presence, once a source of tension, became something they all looked forward to. Even Jackson, who'd been the most vocal about the risks, found himself lingering near the cub, sometimes murmuring to it when he thought no one was listening. The creature's quiet resilience, its ability to recover from fear and injury, had won them over, each of them in their own way. Sarah noticed the cub's behaviors changing, as well. It began to mimic some of the team's actions in its own cautious way, watching how they moved, how they handled objects. One morning, when Jackson was adjusting some equipment, the cub padded over and nudged his tool bag with its nose, as if trying to understand the strange things these humans used. Jackson laughed, a sound that surprised them all, and patted the cub on its head. It was a small moment, but it cemented the creature's place within the camp. It was no longer just a rescued animal, it was becoming part of their lives. Food time became an informal ritual. Initially, they'd given the cub food separately, careful not to overwhelm it. But now, it would approach during their mealtimes, sitting nearby and waiting for scraps, a quiet observer. Jackson would throw it small pieces, laughing as it snapped them up eagerly, its eyes watching him with what could almost be described as humor. Each meal was another step in solidifying the bond, a shared experience that broke down the invisible walls between species. Gradually, the cub began to roam the camp more freely, often following Sarah but sometimes wandering off to explore on its own. The camp had become its home, a safe place where it knew it could find food and companionship. They'd all grown accustomed to its quiet presence, a creature that had once been a feared predator but was now a trusted companion. It was a transformation that none of them had expected, but one that felt natural, as if this unlikely friendship had always been meant to happen. Sarah had noticed that the cub often returned to her side after its brief explorations, a behavior that surprised her. It wasn't loyalty in the human sense, but there was something close to it, a familiarity, a sense of comfort that brought it back to her each time. She understood the significance of this behavior. It was rare for wild creatures to form such bonds, especially with humans, and she felt a deep responsibility to honor that trust. One evening, as she sat beside the cub, gently running her fingers through its fur, she whispered to it, "You're safe here. We'll protect you." She knew it couldn't understand her words, but the sentiment felt real, a promise she intended to keep. And somehow, as it nuzzled her hand in response, she felt as if it understood. The cub's resilience began to inspire the team as well. In the face of its injuries, its fear, it had chosen to trust rather than flee, to allow itself to heal within the camp rather than try to survive alone. It was a lesson in courage, a quiet reminder of the strength that could be found in vulnerability. Each team member, in their own way, began to respect the creature not just as a rescued animal but as a fellow survivor, a creature that had endured and adapted, just as they had. Sarah began teaching the cub simple gestures, cues she hoped it would understand. She would point to a spot and pat her knee, a signal for it to come close, and after several tries, the cub began to follow her lead. It was a small breakthrough, a moment that seemed to bridge the gap between them. This wasn't just a wild animal now. It was a creature learning to understand, to communicate in its own way, a mutual adaptation that spoke volumes about the bond they were forming. The rest of the team watched these interactions with quiet fascination. The cub had become a part of their routines, its presence as natural as any other part of camp life. It was no longer a foreign creature but a part of their lives, a testament to the power of trust and patience. Each day, as it grew stronger, they saw a transformation. A creature once defined by fear and instinct was now learning companionship and cooperation. And so, day by day, the cub continued to heal, its strength returning along with its trust. The bond it shared with Sarah had grown beyond simple dependence. It was something more profound, a quiet understanding that transcended language or species. It had become something beautiful and unexpected, an alliance that neither side had sought but both had come to cherish. The team had once feared this creature, seeing it as a threat. But now, as it followed them, shared their meals, and watched them with intelligent eyes, they saw it differently. It was a creature that had chosen to trust them, to accept their care, and in return, it had given them a glimpse into a world beyond their own understanding. As Sarah sat beside it one last time before nightfall, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This bond, fragile as it was, had become something precious, a reminder that trust could be found in the unlikeliest of places. And as the cub nestled beside her, she knew that, for all the challenges and risks, it had been worth it. They had found something rare, a friendship that defied logic, built on trust, and forged in the quiet moments of healing and understanding. The shift came quietly, almost without notice, but it was unmistakable. One morning, as the team prepared for the day, they heard a sound that stopped them cold, a deep, resonant growl echoing from the trees around them. It was not the cub, but an adult of its species, watching them from a distance with eyes as sharp as knives. The cub, seemingly aware of its kin's presence, let out a soft sound, a low, cautious call that hinted at recognition and comfort. The adult did not move closer but stayed within sight, watching intently, clearly assessing the humans and their actions. Sarah and Jackson exchanged glances, each aware of the potential danger but also curious about what this encounter could mean. The cub, calm and unafraid, stayed close to Sarah's side, seemingly reassuring the adult through its steady posture and gaze. It was an unspoken signal, an indication that it was safe here, that it did not fear these humans. Over the next few days, the adult predator continued to observe them, sometimes coming closer, sometimes disappearing into the trees, only to reappear at unexpected moments. It was a silent standoff, a tentative acknowledgement of each other's presence. The cub played a crucial role in mediating the unspoken tension. Each time the adult appeared, it would trot over to the edge of camp, standing between the humans and its kin, a quiet bridge between the two worlds. Then came the day when the adult approached the camp directly, standing at the edge of their clearing with its eyes fixed on the cub. The team held their breath, unsure of what might happen next. But the cub, with the same calm assurance it had shown in its interactions with the humans, walked over to the adult, nuzzling its neck before looking back at Sarah and Jackson with an unmistakable expression of trust. The adult seemed to relax slightly, its posture less aggressive, its eyes less wary. Sarah took a step forward cautiously but with purpose, extending her hand as if to communicate her intentions. She knew it was a bold move, but something in the way the adult had observed them all this time suggested it might be receptive, if only just. After a moment, the adult lowered its head slightly, not quite a bow but an acknowledgement, a recognition of the human's role in protecting the cub. It was a significant moment, one that redefined the team's understanding of these creatures. This wasn't a simple predator-prey dynamic. There was intelligence here, a depth of understanding that suggested these creatures were far more complex than they had realized. As the days passed, the adult began to make regular visits to the camp, often bringing small game or observing as the humans worked. There was a mutual respect growing between them, a careful balancing act that both species seemed to understand. The humans offered the adult small gestures of goodwill, food shared with care, and actions that indicated they had no intention of causing harm. In turn, the adult allowed the humans into its territory, a silent agreement that, while fragile, held firm. One morning, Jackson noticed the adult circling the camp, sniffing the perimeter and marking certain areas. It was a protective behavior, a way of defining boundaries, but it also suggested that the humans were now part of this shared space. It was as if the adult had accepted them into its domain, acknowledging them as allies rather than intruders. Sarah observed this behavior with quiet awe, understanding that the adult was extending its own form of hospitality, a gesture that spoke to a level of trust she hadn't expected. As the humans continued their work, the presence of the adult predator became a comforting constant. It would often sit near the camp in the evenings, watching over the humans with a quiet, steady gaze, almost as if it were standing guard. The cub, now fully integrated into the camp, moved freely between its kin and the humans, its role as a bridge between their worlds more evident than ever. One day, as the team prepared to set out for a distant location, they were surprised to see the adult predator follow them, shadowing their movements from a distance. It wasn't just a curious act. There was purpose in its steps, a silent offer of protection as they moved through unfamiliar territory. The humans walked with a renewed sense of security, understanding that they were no longer alone in this environment. They had allies here, creatures who, through bonds of trust and shared experiences, had become part of their circle of safety. This alliance began to bear tangible benefits. The adult predator, with its keen senses and instinctual knowledge of the land, often guided the humans around dangerous areas, avoiding predator zones and warning them of potential threats. It was as if the creature had taken on the role of a protector, a silent guardian who understood the value of their alliance. In return, the humans shared their own resources and knowledge. They demonstrated simple tools and techniques, things that might seem inconsequential to them but that the predator watched with intense curiosity. The cub, observing these interactions, began to mimic some of the human's actions, nudging objects with its nose, trying to understand the strange devices and gestures that filled the humans' lives. This quiet exchange of knowledge, while limited, deepened their bond, showing that trust could bridge even the most profound differences. Even the most reserved members of the team found themselves drawn into this alliance. Jackson, who had once been skeptical, often found himself sitting beside the adult predator in the evenings, his posture relaxed, his voice quiet as he spoke to it in a tone that hinted at respect. They all understood that this relationship was fragile, built on mutual understanding and shared respect. Yet each interaction seemed to strengthen the foundation, a quiet testament to what could be achieved when two worlds collided with open hearts rather than hostility. The alliance had transformed the camp, shifting the humans' perspective on their work and their place in this world. They were no longer mere observers. They were participants in a relationship that transcended the roles of researcher and subject. They had become part of a community, a fragile but meaningful alliance that held the potential for something greater. As the days turned into weeks, the humans began to realize the true depth of what they had created. The predator's trust had allowed them to move through this world with a new confidence, its knowledge of the land opening paths and revealing resources they never would have found alone. In return, the humans offered what they could: small tokens of technology, gestures of care, and moments of understanding that bridged the silent gap between them. And so, their alliance flourished. The humans had come to this world as strangers, cautious and uncertain, but they had found something they hadn't anticipated: a connection that defied the boundaries of language and species. They had become part of a story much larger than themselves, a story of survival, respect, and the quiet power of trust. Each day, as they moved through the forest with the adult predator by their side, they were reminded of the fragility of this bond, but also of its strength. They were allies now, bound not by necessity but by choice, a choice to see beyond the boundaries of fear and to embrace the unknown with open hearts. And in that choice, they had found something extraordinary: a shared path, a future built on mutual respect and quiet understanding. The alliance with the apex predators had become an everyday part of life, a rhythm of shared existence that brought a newfound sense of purpose and safety to the team. However, the peace was shattered one evening when a strange, guttural roar reverberated through the jungle, a sound the humans had never heard before, and judging by the sudden alarm of the adult predator, either had it. Within seconds the air was thick with the scent of something dangerous approaching, something neither human nor predator had encountered. Without hesitation, the adult predator moved to the center of camp, positioning itself between the humans and the direction of the sound. Its ears were pinned back, muscles taut, signaling a readiness to defend its allies. Sarah and Jackson quickly gathered the team, each of them instinctively grabbing what few weapons and tools they had on hand, understanding that they might need to rely on their instincts and their bond with this predator to survive the impending threat. The unknown creature emerged slowly from the shadows, an enormous beast with armor-like scales that glinted even in the dim light. Its eyes were a dull, calculating yellow, scanning the camp with a predatory intelligence that sent a chill through everyone. It moved with a powerful, fluid grace, every step a deliberate message of dominance and intent. The apex predator let out a low warning growl, attempting to stake a claim on this territory, but the intruder didn't even flinch, as if already deciding that nothing in this camp posed a threat to it. The humans knew their weapons were likely ineffective against the creature's thick hide, and even the adult predator seemed hesitant to engage directly. But the cub, standing near Sarah, let out a small, instinctive growl, a sound that was more curious than aggressive. The adult predator glanced down at the cub, a silent exchange of warning and reassurance passing between them. It was clear to Sarah that the predator was protecting not just the humans but its own family, an unspoken declaration of mutual defense that only deepened the trust between them. The massive creature advanced, its gaze now locked on the adult predator, clearly identifying it as the only significant opposition. The two predators circled each other, testing, calculating. Every muscle in the adult predator's body was poised to strike, but it hesitated, aware that this fight could endanger everyone in the camp, including the humans and the cub. Jackson, sensing an opportunity, quickly whispered a plan to Sarah. The team would create a distraction, just long enough for the adult predator to gain an advantage. They gathered their tools and improvised a diversion, throwing rocks and setting off small, controlled bursts of noise, just enough to confuse the intruder for a brief moment. The creature turned, momentarily disoriented, and in that split second, the adult predator launched itself at the intruder with a powerful, calculated strike aimed at its exposed flank. The impact was staggering, a clash of titans as the two creatures locked in a brutal struggle. The humans watched, tense but ready, each holding their breath as the fight unfolded. The adult predator fought with a skill and ferocity that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, each movement precise and measured, a testament to its years of survival in this unforgiving environment. Despite its strength, the intruder wasn't easily subdued, its armored hide absorbing much of the damage. It retaliated with a vicious swipe, knocking the adult predator back several paces. Sarah's heart clenched as she watched, her mind racing for a way to help without putting her team in greater danger. She noticed, however, that the cub had crept closer, its body low to the ground, watching the fight with a fierce concentration that spoke of both fear and determination. In a moment of instinct, Sarah called to the cub softly, hoping to pull it back to safety. But instead the cub looked at her, then back at the intruder, as if making a decision of its own. It took a few careful steps forward, staying out of the intruder's immediate sight but positioning itself near its vulnerable hind leg. Sarah realized with a mixture of dread and admiration that the cub was trying to protect its family, and by extension, its human allies. The adult predator, catching sight of the cub's positioning, seemed to draw new strength from the presence of its young and the humans standing in solidarity. With renewed resolve, it went on the offensive, delivering a powerful blow that threw the intruder off balance. The cub took advantage of the opening, darting in to snap at the creature's exposed leg, its small but sharp teeth sinking in just enough to break the creature's focus. The combined assault from both adult and cub began to wear down the intruder. Its movements grew slower, its attacks more desperate. The humans, understanding their role in this fight was one of support, kept up their distraction, drawing its attention just enough to give the predators an edge without directly engaging. Finally, with a last, mighty strike, the adult predator forced the intruder to retreat. Bloodied and battered, the creature let out a low, defeated growl, backing away slowly before turning and disappearing into the shadows from which it had come. The camp was silent, the air thick with the adrenaline of the fight, and the weight of what they had just witnessed. The adult predator, breathing heavily but victorious, nudged the cub, checking it for injuries before looking toward the humans. There was a deep understanding in its gaze, a shared acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. This battle had cemented their alliance in a way that words or gestures could not. They were more than allies now, they were a team bound by survival, each willing to protect the other. Jackson and Sarah exchanged a look, both of them keenly aware that this alliance was now something rare and powerful. They had not only earned the predator's respect but had proven that humans could stand beside these creatures in times of true peril. It was a bond that could not be easily broken, a promise that they would stand by each other in the face of whatever dangers lay ahead. As they tended to their own minor injuries and regrouped, the humans felt a newfound sense of belonging in this strange world. They were no longer outsiders. They were part of a larger story, one that included not just the predators but the entire ecosystem they had come to study and respect. The adult predator, once a symbol of danger, had become a symbol of trust and mutual protection, a silent guardian watching over them,